We're here for our oral history series. I'm Bill Case, and with me is our video man, Mr. John Clark, and we have the great privilege of having as our interviewee today, David Schooler. David, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. Good to be here. Thank you.
Well, David, you've done a lot of things in the village, but let's kind of start with your background. I understand you grew up in Coshocton, Ohio.
I did.
And
graduate of Coshocton High School. Went to Mount Union College in Alliance, Ohio, now known as the University of Mount Union.
And you had some great experiences abroad.
When I left Mount Union, graduated from Mount Union, I went into the Peace Corps. I was 2 years in Venezuela, and then followed that, they sent me to Brazil for 6 months.
You had some language background that helped you in that.
A little bit of language in college, and then they sent the whole group. There were 40 or 50 of us in the group. CD, Community Development 50 or something like that we were called, and we were sent to the University of Arizona for language, bless you, John. Community development, and we did language study in University of Arizona.
I believe you said you were sent to Venezuela around 1968.
1968 to 1971. I came here from Brazil in 1971.
Tell us what you did in Venezuela for the Peace Corps.
Our whole group was assigned to a group of Jesuit priests in Venezuela, and we were scattered all over the country. And we worked with credit unions. They were called credit co-ops there. And my particular area, I was in the Andes Mountains, and I worked with coffee bean farmers. And these were very, very small plots of land that these individual owners or families had, and they were saving their money, what little money they had. They were literally saving in coffee cans in their little kitchens, or some people had them buried in their backyards. And we got them out and consolidated their savings in a co-op, and once we had some assets built up, then we loaned money to these individuals or their families to put a cement floor in their house or build a cement patio outside of their house to dry their coffee beans in the sun. And so it was pretty basic stuff.
But that was deemed a pretty successful program by the
It was very successful because, not because so much of the Peace Corps, but because of these Jesuits who were highly respected in the country, and they really were the glue that made it happen, and we just supported them. So
a rewarding experience.
Very. Mm-hmm.
You moved from there over to Brazil.
I was sent to Brazil along with another volunteer in my program in Venezuela, and then we were sent there to help and support the volunteers in the northeast of Brazil that were working in the same kind of program. So
that concluded in 71. You come back to Columbus.
I came to Columbus. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And looked for a place to live.
I looked for a place to live because I had a job at the time it was City National Bank, which became Bank One, which became Chase. And so I remember driving in here and looking across the freeway and seeing these little brick houses, and I thought, well, this is pretty intriguing. And so I came over the freeway and poked around and ended up renting an apartment.
You said something about the visual aspect of German Village really intrigued you.
Yeah, I wish I had a better memory than I do. It looked pretty good to me. It probably looks better now than it did, 42 years ago. But it was nice. It was nice, and there was a lot of restored property, and so I'm sure that it looks better now, but it was a good place to settle.
You told me that the rent seemed a little high to you where you were living, but you justified it somehow.
I
Tell us
justified
about
it because I paid $180 a month, and I lived in the back half of a house at the corner of Mohawk and Sycamore, which is just one door north of St. Mary's School. I don't think St. Mary's School was occupied at the time. I remember parking my car on the right by the front door of the school. I pulled actually right on the property and parked my car there. But I justified the $180 a month but because I could walk to work, and I was working at 100 East Broad Street, so that helped my expenses.
You were focusing on your new job for a while, but at some point, a certain event was kind of your first exposure to activities in the village, and
Which was Fred and Howard had a Christmas decorating contest, and I decided I would enter, and I decorated my front door, and that was one of the focal points of the contest. And it may have been before or after Christmas, I don't know, but there was a knock at my door at night, and it was Fred. And I don't recall that I'd ever met Fred before. So he informed me that I'd won the best decorated front door. And I can only imagine now, if that contest were going on now, how elaborate some of the decorating is now compared to 40 some years ago. But
and that was the start of your friendship with Fred
It was.
Howard, as well as your activities with the society.
it was,
For those who never got a chance to meet him, can you tell us a little bit what Fred and Howard were like as personalities?
Well, they were personalities. They were characters of the first word. And of course, you all know that they had Hausfrau Haven and the laundromat, and they lived upstairs. They were always curious about everything and wanted to know everybody and what everybody was doing, and just thinking about their interest in the society was unbelievable. They also, I think their other great interest in their lives was Catco Theater, the arts in general, but Catco was really a great focus for them. I'm remembering them when they set up they got interested in bed and breakfasts in German Village, and I think they, at one point in time, they were taking reservations for what few, there weren't very many, but there were some bed and breakfasts. They would, at the store, they would answer the phone and take reservations for that. They also sold tickets for Catco performances.
You told me that this meeting house that we're at today was, you think, the vision of Fred.
I think it was. I'd be curious to know if you've heard that from other people than in these interviews. But
why do you feel that way?
Well, I just know Fred was a very determined person from the get-go, and if he got something going in his head, he was going to see it through. And I think he saw the value in the building, and he got the job done. They raised the money to buy the building, and it was done, renovated, and paid for when the project was completed. So,
right around that time, you become involved as chair of the House and Garden Tour, as well as a member of the Society Board.
Yes. I don't have good recollection about timing of either of those events, but it's been quite a while. Pam Edwards and I'm quite certain that Fred and Howard got us to do that chairmanship of the House and Garden Tour, and whether we were on the board at that time, I'm just not certain of that.
What was it like running the tour back in that era?
It was a committee thing. It was I do remember, um, I'm sure Terry Dickey was involved in this, but I do remember we were always trying to raise money. And
That never changes.
and that never changes. And I remember that we were hustling to find a corporate sponsor, and I don't know whether that might have been maybe Big Bear at the time, that we landed Big Bear as our corporate sponsor for that particular year. But we had a very successful tour. I do remember that, and the temperature was 95 or 98 degrees, and I remember Tom and Lanita Pepper had their house on tour that year, and we actually had people, the lines were so long, we had people passing out on, is that Lasalle Street or whatever that is. It was a big year.
You came up with a novel place to hold the pre-tour dinner.
We did. We ended up in a building at the northwest corner of
Whittier in front.
Whittier and Front, a former factory building of some kind on the 5th floor. Had to climb the stairs. It was a big open loft space.
That's right next to a railroad track, I think.
It's right next to a railroad track, exactly. And and it was hotter and whatever.
You had it on the roof, right?
Oh no, we were inside on the 5th floor. And we had a buffet dinner, and we had a band, and was the closest we could come to some kind of an event space that would house that many people in the immediate area at the time. So,
and you were also a member of the board.
I was a member of the board.
And this is before we moved into. Did you go to meetings in the old space?
I remember meeting over in a temporary space on Front Street for board meetings. I also remember meeting in this building, in the current meeting house, before it was restored, but we had purchased it. And I think Bill Hugus was probably at the time working on architectural plans to restore the building, and it needed a lot of work.
Before the society acquired the meeting house, it was housed in a couple different locations, and I also understand there was maybe some question whether, or at least a controversy, whether this building should be purchased.
I think that there was controversy because we owned the cottage on 3rd Street, where that was really our office. Shirley Keynes was the director of the society at the time, and she had her office there. And then we had acquired the Lasalle property where Tom and Nancy Gross currently live. And I remember board meetings there. I remember going to commission meetings there. But I believe that Fred had this vision that this building that we currently have, 588 South 3rd, was probably the best location and would serve us best, the society best. And he got people organized and raised the money, and makes me think of Herb Lape was active in that fundraising effort, and Brian Arts and Scott Dewhurst and their associate at their law firm were instrumental in raising the funds. And
like $1 million was raised.
It may have been that or more. And by the time the restoration was completed, all the bills were paid, and we owned the building, and ultimately sold off the property on Lasalle Street. And so
one of your activities you've really enjoyed in German Village has been the Garden Club, and also I think Huntington Gardens.
Been active in supporting Huntington Gardens, and also active in supporting Frank Fetch. I'm not much of a gardener for digging away at things, but I'm glad to support both those efforts.
Were you involved in the formation of the Huntington Gardens in any way?
No, no.
Was that already there when you got involved?
Well, no, that would have been, of course, Bert Stevens and Dorothy Brownlee were really the catalyst, I think, in getting that Dorothy's connection with the Huntington, and I think that was the catalyst to get that going.
As your career at City National took a turn in another direction.
Well, I was a management trainee there as I worked in the branch system. Was making loans, and I lasted about 10 months at that and got kind of bored. And there was a posting in the bank for a group tour coordinator in the travel department, which they own, which is one of the very, very few travel agencies in the city at that time. So they were in need of a person to take a charter flight of 250 people to Spain. I was a perfect candidate for that with my language skills, and I wasn't particularly happy as a banker, and so they agreed to move me over into the travel department. I ended up working there for 8 years, and then my partner and I started our own business.
And that's the business you still have today.
Correct.
And what's the address?
600 South Lasalle Street.
We were talking a little bit about that building. It's an interesting one. Tell us what you know about its history.
I have seen photographs, I think maybe Pat Phillips has them, of an auto repair shop. It was a one-story cement block building. And then, to the best of my knowledge, Bob Szymanski and his brother Sam bought the building and added the second floor to it, of which there are 2 apartments on the second floor, and maintained the ground floor for commercial purposes. And as we were talking earlier, the Emporium was the original cook store that I'd ever known of before. Was in that location. Ended up moving to the convention center. Alton Doody, husband of Sue Doody of Lindy's fame,
Right.
ran a custom men's clothing store out of there. It's been a floral shop, number of different. We've been in there now for 11 or 12 years.
You mentioned Fred and Howard and how their sense of humor led them to do some rather unusual things, sometimes to kind of poke fun at the city of Columbus.
Well, they, if one recalls, the Columbus 500 was the automobile race. What do you call these?
Formula One?
Formula One race in downtown. They decided that they would have a competing race, and it may have been a bed race or something. It was on Beck Street. I remember we built these beds or whatever, and we pushed them down and race. And at the same time, the Sunday afternoon that the Formula One race was going on downtown. So Fred and Howard they were always in competition with the city.
You mentioned another similar activity called Voidvilities.
Voidvilities.
What was that?
Voidvilities was a vaudeville show that was set up to compete with the Vaudevilities, which I don't know what group downtown has this annual show that they put on. It's a big fundraiser, and they do a fabulous job. But Fred and Howard thought we should have our own here, which we did here in the meeting house. We did that for 3 or 4 years. Mark Coffey, I remember, was an MC one year. One other thing that Fred and Howard did in competing with the city was they ran for mayor one year, and they jointly, and their slogan was 2 heads are better than 1. And so they had campaign buttons that they passed out that had this little caricature of the two of them with their slogan for mayor, "Two heads are better than one." Unfortunately, they failed in their
I bet there were
election
some
effort.
write-ins for them, though.
I bet there were.
Another endeavor they had that got some things done politically was the famous tree planting in front of Lindy's. Tell us about that.
That's a very good point. A lot of people were frustrated with the maintenance of the brick streets down here. And so to make a statement, Fred found a pothole on Beck Street and dug it out and planted a tree in it. And as a result of that, he may have been working before he planted the tree, but the result of the tree planting in Beck Street was that the city agreed to allow German Village Society remove the bricks on Beck Street and repair it. They added in, they helped by adding a concrete truck and some sand and that sort of thing, but we did the actual labor of pulling the bricks up. The city came in, relayed the concrete and the sand, and then we put the bricks back down. It was a pretty big deal in the city. The Mayor Reinhardt came down, and the city service director Gisela Rosenbaum was there. So it was good fun.
And they made sure that the press was on hand as well.
Oh, big time, absolutely.
And you were there.
I was there. Yeah.
One of the things you've been instrumental in as a great supporter of the society is the continued maintenance and, in fact, improvement of this meeting house.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us why you've done that.
Well, I just think this building is really important to our past success over the past 20 years, however long it's been. I think it's our success in the future. I can't think of any neighborhoods in the city that are so fortunate to have such an incredible facility as this, as a meeting hall and center of activity and housing our executive offices and host our visitors, and it's just really a pretty incredible thing.
Just in the short time I've been on the board, I know you've helped both with time and treasure with respect to the offices, the fest hall, many improvements.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad to do that. I think it's an important part of all of our lives here.
Well, it's greatly appreciated. David, you've been in the village over 40 years. Tell me in your own words what living here, working here has meant to you.
I think people. It's a lot. I came from a small town, Coshocton. When I was in the Peace Corps, I lived in very small towns, and I sort of view German Village as a small town. And by good fortune, it's adjacent to a really wonderful city, which offers so many amazing things that it's just a great place to live. And so you have this small town environment. You have the wonderful people who live here and live close by to one another, and you can reach out and touch your neighbor's house, and you don't have to mow a big yard. And so I just think this neighborhood attracts a lot of wonderful people, and that's what makes it go around.
Well, you're one of them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank you,
your
Bill.
time today.
Thank you.